Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Thursday, February 26th, and we are joined by a very special guest. It is Sho Alli, host and producer at Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Couldn't be a better time for us to bring Sho on, just with the signing of Max Scherzer coming down this morning. I suppose it is still pending at this point, kind of waiting for a physical, but obviously we've heard from Max himself in that time, so great timing to talk about it, Sho. But before we kind of get into that, how has your off season been, and what have you kind of been up to in your time away from baseball?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess immediately following the World Series, what we do at the Fan is, reaction to baseball, looking ahead. Obviously, I guess it was November and December, January, a lot of hockey talk, right? So talking about the Leafs, and it's funny because I think here in Toronto, the Raptors got off to a hot start too. So it was interesting. I think people were not yet ready right after the World Series. I think we were there now here in February, but right after the World Series, I feel like you didn't have the emotional bandwidth from a long run and then a heartbreaking loss in Game 7 of the World Series to give a lot of attention to the Leafs or the Raptors. And now the Raptors have evened out a little bit. I think they're still better, I think, than where people thought they'd be, but still, I think you have some question marks about them. The Leafs have not played particularly well. And I mean, you know what? This goes beyond hockey in Toronto. I mean, the Flames are not great. The Canucks are not great. The
Wow,
Jets are not great.
you're just coming right at
Like,
me with the Flames there.
well, here's the thing. Who's the best Canadian hockey team right now? The Oilers. And the Oilers are what? Only a handful of points out of not being in the playoffs. So, like, Canadian sports kind of down bad right now, right? And then, of course, just a couple days ago, Canada loses the gold medal to the Americans. So, God, it's been a topsy-turvy last few months. So I don't know about you guys. I'm ready for baseball to distract us all again for the next 8 months.
Yes, the Blue Jays would never hurt you. They would never do you wrong
Well, you
like
know what's
that.
funny? Keegan Matheson of MLB.com posted in the immediate aftermath of Canada losing to Jack Hughes and the Americans in Italy. Immediately, it was a video of baseball can't hurt you, kind of like what you're saying, Jory. And it was a clip of Gosman throwing off the mound or like a side session or whatever. And then I think 5 minutes later, he also posted a video of George Springer bursting out of the Blue Jays clubhouse wearing a Team USA hockey jersey. And I thought, God, you just said baseball can't hurt me. It's still too fresh. So, and then there were pictures of Springer taking hacks at the plate because it was an off day for the veterans, right? It was just, there are pictures of him wearing his Team USA jersey. I'll give him a pass because I think he is legitimately a big hockey fan. But yeah, I'm ready to move past that now.
I mean, if you want to talk about, like just picking at wounds, I mean, we can see there, you got the Patriots shirt on
Yeah.
too. Like there's just been, just kind of
Yeah.
everything, I guess, kind of coming together for the last couple
But
months.
see,
So
you know what? I thought the Patriots were heavy underdogs. Like they were like 3-1 underdogs, and they played like it, right? So that didn't actually bother me that much. But the gold medal, I sulked.
yeah.
I sulked for at least a whole day, and then now I feel good about it. I feel fine now.
And the Blue Jays are 1-4 to start spring training. So all right. So Max Scherzer, he's coming back to the Blue Jays. Very, very exciting news. I think, obviously really cool to see this future Hall of Famer wearing the Blue Jays uniform and really have this desire to come back to Toronto. And obviously, how can you not kind of see the letter from his daughter this morning and not, just immediately think that's adorable and one of the coolest things you've seen from an athlete's child. What was kind of your first reaction to the news late last night, early this morning, and how do you kind of feel about his place with this Blue Jays team?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what his stature is, like what his role is, I suppose, because, if we're looking at it right this second, February 26th, and again, he hasn't reported yet. Is he going to be ready for the regular season, like for opening day, I should say? I feel like there's a good chance he starts the season on the IL along with Bieber, just if he's not ready, essentially. But just that aside, where we sit right now, so let's see, Cease, Gosman, Yasavage, Ponce, and Barrios, right? So if those are your five, if that's your five starting rotation, then in theory, someone's got to get displaced. I mean, Eric Lauer, who I think is pitching tomorrow, Friday, he had already pitched in the spring, and he said that he wants to be a starter. So, I mean, you essentially have with Lauer, Scherzer, and Bieber after those five in some order, you have eight caliber starting pitchers. So I was surprised it happened because it didn't really feel like it's not that they didn't need him because you can never have enough starting pitching in general. I think that's a mantra that we hear repeated often for a good reason. But I wasn't sure what his role was going to be. I mean, let's face it. Last year, the three of us talked about this. I mean, home runs were a bit of an issue for him. He had the thumb issue. Obviously, if we go to his last appearance in a Blue Jays uniform, one run over four and a third in Game 7 of the World Series. So, I mean, there was some good there, no question. He clearly wasn't done. But it'll be interesting to see what role he has, right? I mean, the news about his innings pitched incentives, I guess, in terms of it's like 65, 70, 75, all the way up to 100 plus innings, and how you get $1 million for every, however, whatever threshold it was. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like, and it'll be kind of fun for us to track essentially, right? I mean, every time he completes a quality start or something, like, oh, that's 500K in Max Scherzer's pocket, right? So I'll be very curious to see what that looks like. I'm curious what you guys thought. What did you think of when you saw the signing? Because I don't think after Ben Nicholson Smith said it was in the works, but I didn't really think it was going to happen until I actually saw the news, essentially.
Yeah, like that's what I was going to ask you even is that there's a sense of kind of surprise almost about this, even though we'd kind of heard stuff, because it's hard to place exactly where he fits in the pecking order and where he does hypothetically fit also kind of doesn't spell the greatest news for a guy like Eric Lauer, who's already
Yeah.
kind of said, hey, I'd like to start. Or even dare I say, Shane Bieber is currently battling some kind of arm injury, and we don't have the full maybe details of that. But even to that, to feel that you have to add Scherzer certainly can't mean good things, can it?
Well, the way I view it is, let's say it's Cease, Gosman, Barrios, Savage, Ponce. Let's say that's your starting five. Then I think, and again, you're right about the Bieber news. We don't know how long it'll be, what the issue is. I mean, they just say forearm fatigue, but we'll see what that ends up meaning. But I gotta think, just having Lauer and Scherzer as your, let's say, sixth and seventh guys, I gotta think that's a better space for the Blue Jays to be than where they were last year, where we were talking early in the season about Spencer Turnbull or Jose Urania, right? For example, and I mean, look, Urania, I think there was a start or two where he actually pitched, all things considered, not horribly. Spencer Turnbull, a little less so. Fastball velo did not look great for him. So those were short-lived experiments. If you want to expand it, Easton Lucas, for example, because after, not counting Bieber, after Scherzer and Lauer in this system, and you guys would know this better than most, I think, but it's the Adam Mackos of the world or Chad Dallas, who we have been hearing a little bit more about here in the spring. And if you're not sure, if you're the Blue Jays, if you're not confident that they're the ones or someone else, they've backed off Ricky Tiedemann, for example, he might not even be a starter anymore. But the point being is, after you get past that sixth and seventh guys, if you're not confident, then I gotta think this is just them insulating themselves. Because I think the other part of it too is, even if you accept that the five we listed are going to be your starting rotation, even if you hope they're the five all year, you got to think one or two of those guys will get injured at some point between now and, you hope, the playoffs, essentially, right? So it does feel like maybe at most it's an insulating move to injury. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think, it's the part that I've kind of been struggling with where you look at it. And obviously, you mentioned all the names last year, whether it was Urania, Turnbull, like Bowden Francis running out there for,
Sure. Yeah.
10 or 12 starts with a 6+ ERA. And so, obviously you can't have too much pitching depth. But in this case where it's like, you have these established guys and you're bringing in, Max Scherzer. It's not like you're bringing in, Rich Hill or some guy that, can kind of just fill in or whatever. Like, you feel like it's Max Scherzer. Like, he's there to pitch. He's there to do, be a veteran and fill in starts for your team, which is, for me in my head where I'm trying to wrap my head around what they're going to do with this guy. But, at the same time, like you said, it's a $3 million contract to start. So it may very well just be a spot where he can kind of come in and fill in when those guys go down, if there is injuries, or obviously with Trey Savage, as we know that they are going to be cautious with his workload as he comes back from, such a massive inning increase from year over year. So really interesting there. But then, I mean, if you were to live in an imaginary world where we get to June 1st and let's say Shane Bieber comes back healthy, Kevin Gausman's looks great, Dylan Cease's look great, you Savage looks like he's building up strong, and Ponce turns into, everything that they dream he can be, then what is this rotation going to look like when the midsummer, if everything does kind of turn out okay for them?
Yeah, I mean, we heard today that John Schneider views it, and he's already told the pitching staff, the all pitchers, I suppose, who are included in this rotation conversation, he has told all of them that it is I think the word they used was meritocracy. So if that is the case, then it might very well just come down to who is pitching well in that moment. I got to think, if everyone is pitching well, maybe we are talking about a trade of somebody, right? I mean, maybe it's a Jose Barrios, maybe, because I would be surprised if Ponce is getting traded. It does feel like the guys who are on 1-year deals probably not coming back. I'll put Gausman aside just because he has history with the franchise, but Bieber and Scherzer seem unlikely to return going forward. I mean, you never know, certainly. I mean, it's February. A lot can change between now and this time next year, for example. But Gausman not under contract after this year. Scherzer obviously is 41. Bieber, I think a big part of him even opting into coming back for the 1-year deal, the qualifying offer. I got to think a part of that just by itself was he wanted to rehabilitate the value, not just his arm, but the value as much as humanly possible so that he could hit free agency next year and really cash in, right? So if that is the case, and I don't think Scherzer is going to be part of the long-term plans because how could he at 41 for any team, really? But I do wonder if it's just, stopgap measures, knowing that your rotation core, at the very least, going forward, will at least be Cease, Savage, maybe Ponce in the short term or medium term, and maybe Lauer in the medium term as well. And then you kind of just figure out from there.
Would you flirt with a 6-man rotation?
I guess maybe. Maybe I suppose it depends where the team is, right? Just because we've heard so much about Barrios and Gausman in particular because they've been on the team the longest, but just how, some guys like it, some guys don't. Routine plays a part of whether or not they do a 6-man rotation. So I think, I think you have to consider it, right, Jory? But I'm not sure it's what they want to do if we're only going based on what they have done, if that makes sense. But I mean, if everyone is pitching great, I feel like it'll be impossible for us not to have that conversation come, I don't know, the trade deadline, for example.
I wonder, the Jose Barrios of it all, where obviously he comes back from the injury last year. He comes into spring and immediately says that he was, feeling the injury at this time last year. And of course, he goes out, he pitches, fairly well in the first half, obviously an above average starter. And then everything kind of explodes in the second half and leads to him landing on the IL for the first time in his career. And, first time in spring, I think it's fair to, give him a pass for the first time out where his velo's down a little bit and all of that. But like, where do you think that this is heading if the velocity isn't back and he doesn't quite look as sharp as we've seen him be in his career?
I will say on the velo thing, I was told by a variety of people who were there that even for Dunedin, it was a little cold, right? Or for Florida, it was cold, which I know, we're all in places where it's far, far, far colder. So I don't think anyone no, it's feeling bad for any of our colleagues down there or for Barrios himself. But I do think that played a factor. So I'm willing to give him a pass, to your point, Zach, going forward, just in case, let's put it that way, just in case that it's a one-off, just because generally speaking, even I think it was Clay Holmes on the other side of that particular game, and even it looked a little funky for him too. I mean, they both hit guys. It looked like they were having trouble gripping the ball. So maybe that's just a part of cold and early spring, getting back into the groove kind of thing. But you're right. It's an interesting question because he can opt out. I wonder if he would opt out just because he's making a decent amount of money, and if things are not going to go his way, it might be better money-wise for him to just not opt out essentially.
Yeah.
But you're right. I wonder if money is something that's at the top of their mind. And I mean, the way they've operated would lead me to believe it's not. But if they wanted to save money on Barrios and go after someone else, I could see them trading him, no question. But I I would be surprised at this point, just because there's a question mark about Scherzer's health and age related largely. There is a question mark about Bieber, also health related. So, you know, if neither of them pitch well, on the opposite side of, if everyone pitches great, if neither of them pitch well, then you kind of need Barrios, right? So at this stage, I would be surprised if he wasn't on the team, come the trade deadline. But that obviously presupposes that Scherzer and Bieber have not gotten back on track the way you'd hoped.
Yeah, I also think it's worth kind of acknowledging that, even though Barrios isn't necessarily the ace that they kind of traded for or top of the rotation arm they traded for, I mean, his propensity for eating innings is exactly
Sure.
what you asked for of a fifth starter. And, he's an expensive one at that, but he would, all things considered, provide the value that you're kind of looking for the back of the rotation. But my question, I guess, to that end is, if you're the Jays, how do you maneuver him and his potential, even something like a dissatisfaction? We've heard that, the relationship got a little kind of iffy at times last year. And, balancing that and exactly where that could play into if we are looking at a potential situation where he gets bumped from the rotation again.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see let's say it is a meritocracy like Schneider says, and Barrios is the one not pitching well, and let's say Lauer is pitching well, and then Bieber comes back and they want to squeeze him in there. And let's say Barrios is the odd man out. It will be really interesting to see how he handles it because, by all reports, even he said it when he spoke to the media a couple of weeks ago that, he regrets the way things were handled. But at the same time, it does kind of feel like everyone has moved on. But given that he apologized, I wonder. It's not like he can do it again, right? It's not you can, not. I don't want to say that he behaved poorly, but it's not as though he can have another incident that also ends with him apologizing to his teammates. And again, I think from everything I've heard about Jose, he's a great teammate. He's a great guy. Extreme work ethic. He's a guy who takes it very seriously. To your point, Jory, he's a guy who eats innings. He's a workhorse, a workman-like attitude. I've met him a couple times. He's a nice dude as well. It's just I would be surprised, and I think that's why I and so many other people were surprised the way it went, the way it did, right? But I would be surprised if it went poorly, if the relationship went pear-shaped again. But yeah, I mean, it's not like we can discount that as a possibility, right? I mean, there's a very real possibility that he is I don't want to say worst one, but he is the odd man out, right? It'll be interesting though, because to your point, expensive a little bit based on production, but he also did start last year pretty hot, all things considered. So I'm kind of hoping he gets back on the horse here because it has been fun watching him. And he makes it a point of pride to be the competitor that he is. So I am curious what that looks like going forward. But I would be surprised if it went poorly for him.
Yeah, we've certainly seen him like bounce back from poor seasons before. He did it obviously in that 2023 year where he comes back from being, I
Right.
think it was the worst qualified starter in the majors in 2022, and he comes back and delivers a really nice season. So that's kind of obviously what they'll hope for, especially with the rotation kind of, having a couple more question marks than usual. Before we move on, the whole conversation kind of, made my mind go to a Blue Jays starter who maybe had his relationship and not in the on the best of terms with the Blue Jays recently. And I just wonder what your thoughts were on Alek Manoah's comment in the
Oh,
Athletic the other
yeah.
day, where he says that he was a very big piece in the Blue Jays getting to the World Series run.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw that trending and I thought, God, like, what could the possible context been of this quote? Like, how would this
I thought it
have
was
come
fake.
up?
I thought it was fake
Yeah,
when I
I thought
first
it was
saw
fake
it.
too. I thought it was an AI thing, and then I
Yeah.
saw I think it was Sam Blum was the one who tweeted it out, and I thought, gosh, like I've had Sam on the station before as my guest for Angel series, so it must be real. And then it went around a variety of outlets. Yeah, I mean. Look, he was a huge part of the seasons prior to his injury, right? Like specifically, I guess 2 years. The year he got called up and carved the Yankees
Yeah.
in Yankee Stadium, and then the following year where he was a legitimate Cy Young contender, and then it was just unfortunately a downhill trajectory. I guess was that 21 and 22 or 22 and
Yeah.
23?
21 and 22. Yeah.
2020. Okay, so there you go. So yeah, I mean, look, he clearly had big parts of those seasons, and I guess maybe his quote meant he, big part of culture setting, which I think
Yeah.
is true to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, hard for anyone to believe a guy who was literally DFA'd had a huge role in the 2025 season. I don't want to pile on because I mean, God, I thought Alek Manoah was going to be here for the rest of time. I thought we were going to be talking about Alek Manoah the same way we talk about, maybe not like Doc or Steve, but I thought maybe we'd be talking about him in the same way we, heartily reminisce about other pitchers. Like, maybe in the same way we'll reminisce about Kevin Gausman in 10
Yeah.
years. I kind of thought we'd be doing that with Alek Manoah, but unfortunately that's not the way it goes. I do hope that that's what we do with Trey Savage, but I mean, you guys hear it all the time. There's no such thing as a safe pitching prospect, right? So who knows? I mean, the Savage had such a hot start, but let's face it, so did Alek Manoah, right?
Yeah, it's funny. If you had gone back to 2022 and said that the Blue Jays went to Game 7 of the World Series in 2026,
Yeah,
you would be like, "Whoa, Alek Manoah was probably a huge part of that." But
I
He was
remember
probably
I
pitching
did
in that game.
Yeah, right. I did a Jays talk once. I'll never forget. I think it was in 2022. I don't think it was the year he got called up, but because I think everyone had higher expectations for Manoah, so it must have been the 22 season. But he was great. And the Angels, funnily enough, were in town when Shohei was still with the Angels. And I think in one of those games, I was at the stadium and we did Jays talk after the game, and it was Manoah Otani was the pitching matchup, and it was like every bit what you'd expect from
yeah,
those two guys, right? And I remember it was so electric, and I thought, God, we're gonna watch this for the rest of the time. And now Shohei Otani is a two-time World Series champion with the Dodgers, and Alek Manoah is not on the Blue Jays
on the
anymore. So
Angels.
yeah, weird timeline we live in.
So funny. I just thought, as we were talking about the Brios thing, it kind of came to my mind. I was like, it kind of sounds like a guy who just talked about being a part of the Blue Jays
Yeah.
team, but he wasn't.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
Let's move on, though. One thing that we did want to do with you, obviously, we're here in the first week of spring training games, and if we can gamify something around this time of year, it's always fun to do. So we kind of pulled together a couple of overreactions for you, and we're
Okay.
hoping if you can tell us whether they are overreactions or not. I'll hit you with the first one. I mean, obviously, this is kind of, I think the big storyline that everybody was looking to begin spring training. But from what we've seen from Kazuma Okamoto so far, he will be an all-star in year one with the Blue Jays.
Wow, an all-star. I think okay, so I'm supposed to tell you if it is an overreaction or if it's
Or a proper
or
reaction.
or normal reaction.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say that is an overreaction, but I do think he will be very good. I will say, let's say that because you're right. So far, he has looked tremendous. The third base defense actually looks. I'm not going to say he's going to be the best third base defender in the world, but he looks pretty good, all things considered, to the point where I don't think it'll be an issue. Let's put it that way. I'm not sure you're going to get Matt Chapman level defense from Okamoto at third base, but he looks fine. Offensively, I mean, he can clearly pull the ball. He has power. We saw earlier, I think it was today, I think the guy's name was White, Thomas White, one of the
Yeah.
Marlins relievers. He throws a ball, and it was 96 miles an hour, and Okamoto has a 104 two-run double down the left field line. So, that answered partially a question for me about, we have to see it do more consistently, obviously, but I think there's always some kind of question about can players who have had first careers not in Major League Baseball, Korea, Japan, obviously in Okamoto's case, can they catch up to the consistent velo of Major League Baseball. And I think it's valid to at least wonder about it, right?
Yeah.
And again, we have to see him do it more consistently once the season actually starts, but it hasn't seemed to be a huge issue for him in a number of spring games. I won't go so far to say he's going to be an all-star, but I have really liked what I've seen from him so far.
Yeah, he's definitely been one of the early storylines in that regard offensively. But you want to talk about surprises of spring, and I'm sure you know what's coming. Eloy Jimenez has been tearing the cover off the baseball, hitting baseballs very hard and hitting some homers too. Eloy Jimenez, 26-man roster.
Oh, okay. You know what? That is not an overreaction. I think that's
Wow,
very
nice.
possible. I will say I think that is very, very possible. No question. If only because, especially without Santander, and I know they traded for Jesus Sanchez, and he will undoubtedly be a part of this. He's making millions of dollars, so I got to think he will be on the roster. But I do wonder about Eloy because, generally speaking, the team, it's not as though they don't have power. It's not what it is. It's simply Eloy Jimenez has so much power, it probably will be too hard to ignore if you're a team that wants more of it, if that makes sense. I think the thing that might be a throw a wrench into these plans is where does he play, right? And where does he play in the field? Because obviously it feels like from a DH standpoint, George Springer will be occupying that role, for the most part, most of the time. But I am curious what it looks like for Eloy because this is a guy who hit 30 bombs. I mean, I know that was in his rookie season, which was a not recently. Obviously, health obviously has been an issue. I mean, he's had strains and tears and pulls and all these different things, a whole variety all over his body. So that has largely been the reason why he hasn't stuck. I think his whole career, except for one season, was with the White Sox. So it'll be curious to see what that looks like going forward. But I mean, he has real power. And if you have that kind of power, I think teams will always give you a chance, right? I think the other thing part of it too is he was in the system last year too, very briefly, very briefly. So it's not as though they've never wondered about this. This is clearly something that they've talked about and thought about before. So I think it's very possible he makes the active roster. But of course, you'd have to play some shenanigans, right? I think like someone would have to get optioned, multiple people leave in, depending. I mean, if you want to, again, and I'm not saying this is particularly likely, but I think Davis Schneider, for example, has options. So you might see them play that roster game, but I kind of would be a little excited to see Eloy. But again, it's the first week of spring, like you said.
Yeah, the ceiling is so intriguing there, and I think obviously Arden Zwelling had such a great piece on it the other day too, where he's talking Eloy who was ready to retire
Right.
coming into the off season. So really really interesting to see, and another thing too that I think Jory and I talked about, but we hadn't been able to get on the pod about it is that he said in that story that he'd be willing to accept starting the year in AAA. So, if he's willing to do that, I think that the Blue Jays, would be pretty happy
Sure.
to slot him there. And I kind of wonder though, I mean, with seeing this outfield glut that the Jesus Sanchez trade has kind of created, and they've got Nathan Lucas and Davis Schneider, and obviously you can put Eloy in that group now. How do you kind of see that shaking out, and what do you kind of feel like these guys need to show in the next couple weeks to kind of put themselves in a spot to break camp with the team?
So, where are we picking guys who would be
Yeah,
in the outfield
yeah, if
configuration?
if you're looking at, I guess it would basically be kind of in that left field slot,
Right, right.
right, with the Lucases and the Schneiders and the Sanchez's. Like, how do you kind of see that
Uh,
playing time getting doled out?
it's tough, right? Because okay, so let's say Springer is in the DH spot, and I think he will play the outfield just out of necessity at some point this season. But just for
Yeah,
the sake of this conversation, we'll put him aside. So then you have Varsho being your everyday center fielder. Straw is on the team, and so I got to think based on his contributions, I don't think they're going to get rid of him. So he is a part of this, but Varsho, Sanchez, Lucas, right? I could see Sanchez in left field. I could see Barger having more playing time in right field, especially if Okamoto is going to be at third base. Obviously, Barger's going to be on the team. I wonder if Barger against righties. I wonder if Barger, Varsho, Sanchez is your
yeah.
outfield, and then Straw. and Lucas are on the bench, and then you kind of deal with it from there. And again, maybe you find a trade for a guy like Lucas. I've said this before many times. I'm a Lucas truther in the sense that if Nathan Lucas was a starter for a team that did not have this much of a glut outfield wise, I think he would be the everyday center fielder for somebody. And
Yeah.
I don't know what that team is without looking at the rosters, in a granular way. But and again, I'm not saying he could only start for bad teams, but it's just
Yeah.
that unfortunately bad teams tend to have more opportunities. So, we're talking about the Marlins of the world, the White Sox, the A's, the Rockies, like those kinds of teams. But generally speaking, I think Lucas is good enough to be the starting outfielder on most teams, which is why it kind of sucks if he ends up getting buried on the depth chart because I actually think A, he's fun to watch, and B, he's very good. And we saw it in the playoffs. He actually came through with some big knocks in
Yeah.
the playoffs in important moments, some diving catches to help save runs as well. So I think he is on the team, but the Blue Jays also have a history of doing right by players. So if they feel the team might be better off carrying a Jimenez, for example, and they don't have space because they already have Jesus Sanchez, then maybe Lucas is the odd man out. Maybe Straw is the odd man out, but it does feel like Sanchez, I would be surprised if he was the odd man out. Let's put it that way.
It,
Yeah.
it feels a little bit like we're headed towards a situation where the Blue Jays have to maybe turn one of those outfielders into potentially an infielder via trade, or
Yeah.
maybe it's as easy as they just look at a guy like Davis Schneider and they go, well, he can play the infield, he can play the outfield, uh, and we'll just stick with that.
Quote from Ross
That's
Atkins. Yeah.
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 Yeah, Davis Schneider is really interesting because Schneider and Leo Jimenez are interesting to me because Leo is out of options. Schneider, I believe, again, to the earlier point, I believe does have options. So, if you again want to play that game, you could option Schneider just to start the year if
Yeah.
you believe it would be better served by, you know, having him in reserve and bringing him up very early on if that's what you really wanted to do, just to give other guys a look. But I don't envy Ross Hackett's making those decisions, but it is interesting, right? Because now that Bo is gone, it does feel like they have at least of the regulars, and I think Schneider has played with the Jays long enough to count him like a semi-regular, but
Yeah.
still, it's interesting because it doesn't feel like they have as much infield depth as we had become used to seeing. Whereas the outfield, there's so many guys. And again, I mean, I'm certain there will be times where Okamoto will play the outfield, Barger will play at third, Clement plays at third, Okamoto sits, and Schneider plays second, or whatever. Like whatever the Clement plays, whatever. Configuration you want to do. Maybe to give Andres Jimenez a night off and Ernie plays short. Like they could do a variety of things, but it'll be interesting because it doesn't feel like they have a lot of I shouldn't say a lot of. It doesn't feel like they have the same kind in terms of parts of the diamond depth that they've had before. Ernie is interesting too, right? Because Ernie last year was kind of that super utility guy, and now it does feel like he is largely, out of necessity, going to play every day, right? I mean, he is largely going to be this team's everyday second baseman for the most part, and I'm sure they'll move him around like we just said as need be, but I'm fascinated to see what they do. I mean, I think last year they used 146, I think was the number, different starting lineups. I don't think that's going to change by a lot coming this year.
Yeah, I was gonna say 162 games. We're probably gonna see like 150 different
Right.
different machinations of this group. And again, like their Andres Jimenez like tweaks his hamstring away from man, like what are you doing with all these guys? Because you don't necessarily like have the infield depth to fill that out. So will be really interesting there. I'll throw one last overreaction at you, and it's
Okay.
kind of in this outfield mix. But Dalton Varsho obviously off to a very great spring himself after a really productive 2025 when he was on the field. So last year we saw him 123 WRC plus. It was like a 40 home run pace. So what we've seen from him so far in this spring signals that he is on pace to repeat a season like that.
Okay, so so overreaction or not, 40 home runs and a monster
I
WRC plus season,
Yeah, we'll
largely.
we'll say 125 WRC plus. Let's say 30 home run season.
Okay, sure. All right. I don't think that's an overreaction. I think there's a good chance that happens. Also because it's a contract year for him. And I know this is not very empirical or analytical, but it does feel like when players are in contract years, they get that contract year bump, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure I want to say Varsho is a Boris client. So if that's the case, then, he's going to generally speaking, those guys go to free agency. Even if they do re-sign with the team they're with, generally they test free agency. And I think we've heard, and Shapiro and Atkins have said this a number of times about a variety of players, most recently Bo, but just that they respect the players and their time and their desire to at least be wined and dined. I could see that happening for Varsho. He's also a really interesting person to value, right? Because a large part of what makes him so valuable is not just his very real power, but it's obviously his Gold Glove caliber defense. So I'm very interested to see what that looks like for Varsho going forward. Because last year, weird start to the season. You had the offseason surgery, didn't get into the major league lineup for quite some time, played really well to your point with all the stats, and then hamstring injury and grabbing at his hamstring as he turns second base. I remember I was literally there watching that thinking, God, no, you can't. I felt bad for the guy because of
Yeah.
all of the injury luck essentially. So yeah, I think that's very possible. I'll say this too. I mean, I'm glad you guys are not in my fantasy baseball league because I for sure am drafting Dalton Varsho this year. I'm very high on him, so I don't think that's an overreaction whatsoever.
No, there's lots to believe for sure. And then, I mean, in free agency, he'll for sure be valued because he brings a lot
Yeah.
of power, which is always going to, cost a premium, and plays a premium position extraordinarily well, although remains to be seen given the injuries and potentially how he may age if that's something that he's ultimately going to be able to maintain into his 30s. But, even to that point, he's going to be a really key cog offensively for this team if they're going to replicate basically what they did last year, given that there's a Bo Bichette sized hole missing from the lineup.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they replicate the absence of Bo from a production standpoint. Because to your guys' point, I mean, because a lot of people have said this in the absence of since Bo signed with the Mets that well, you know what, the Blue Jays didn't have Bo from whatever it was, September all the way to the game one of the World Series, and they still made it that far, which is true, no question. That is factually the case. But they also did have Bo Bichette from the beginning of the year to September, which was like 90% of the regular season, and he played pretty well. I mean, there was the point. I think that when he got injured, Bo was leading baseball for sure, the American League, but baseball in hits and I think doubles, I want to say.
Yeah.
So if that, like, I mean, I don't know how you produce that. And maybe you can, like Moneyball, we can recreate him in the aggregate. Maybe they can with Okamoto and a healthy Varsho. Andres Jimenez was not healthy for a good chunk of last year, and he was on the broadcast today talking about how it was a lot of work for him to get healthy, but that's how he feels right now. So maybe it's a collective thing, right? It kind of reminds me of the conversation. I know this is not a baseball topic, but it kind of reminds me of the conversations we all had going into the hockey season here in Toronto about Mitch Marner and how, big time player, 100-point player. He is, I mean, I know he got technically traded, but he goes to Vegas essentially and, living his best life in the desert. But how do the Leafs replicate all that point production? And I think you can make a pretty good argument. They just didn't, essentially, right? And that's at least a part. I don't know if it's the reason, but it's at least a part of why they're probably not going to make the playoffs this year. And they replaced him with, I don't want to say plugs, but they replaced him with guys who are, far from being 100-point players. I do think with the money I don't want to say saved, but the money they are not spending on Bo Bichette, they got Kazuma Okamoto. They got some other players as well, mostly on the pitching side. So I think you can survive the absence of Bo Bichette, but you do need a lot to go right, right? It's if you could get even 70% what you got from George Springer last year, if you could get a very good to perhaps all-star season from Okamoto, that would certainly help. A healthy season from Varsho and Jimenez would help. I'm not so worried about like Lucas and Clement. I mean, those guys outside of the playoffs, they actually had pretty average seasons overall. So I'm not so worried about that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they replace Bo when it comes to overall statistical production this year.
Jory, you have Mitch Marner thoughts? Between us,
It's fun.
Jory's the hockey guy, so I'm.
I think those thoughts are best left not on the airwaves.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think, one thing with Bo that he did really well last year was like coming up in big moments, right? I think he was like the third best hitter in baseball by clutch rating or whatever
Right,
kind of
right.
timing statistic you want to look at. And obviously, a lot of baseball is timing, and him being good at it is tough to replicate. So,
How
um
crazy would it be if they got like again 60 to 70% of Bo's production out of Okamoto by
Well,
himself? That would be
that would
wild.
that would
Honestly,
basically
that
fill the
that would
gap,
do it.
right? Because
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, again, like you mentioned, you're looking at a healthy Varsho. You're looking at ideally Andres Jimenez that's going to regress a little bit to the mean.
yeah.
You're looking at Jesus Sanchez has the chance to really. I mean, I've been banging this drum. Zach's been banging this drum. There's a lot of similarities between him and a guy like an Addison Barger,
And you
who
get a
you're also
full year of Barger too.
like there's a
Right.
lot kind of in the aggregate that they've done to fill in the gaps. It's just a matter of how you feel about the Jays being necessarily a strong link team, leaning on a guy like a Vlad, like a Bichette, who by the way, Vlad is going to be at another level, you would figure, if he's able to replicate what he did in the postseason. And then on the other side of the coin is the kind of weak link, which the Jays have kind of decided to go that route of filling in the gaps as opposed to going out and making a huge splash, even if they did make efforts to do so.
It is funny we've gone this long without really talking about Vladdy at all, essentially, right? Because you're right. I mean, a lot of the narrative on this season will be about the absence of Bo, and they didn't sign Kyle Tucker, and they didn't get a big bat other than Okamoto, and that he's a question mark because he's never played in Major League Baseball before. Like there are a lot of valid concerns about the offense at the very least. I thought how they've I don't want to say remade, but certainly the addition of $200 million plus with Dylan Cease is a big move, no question. But it will be really interesting to see what kind of season Vladdy has. I mean, I feel he had a very good season last year. It might not have been an Aaron Judge level season, but one of the phrases we use on the radio a lot is, "Can Vladdy be the aircraft carrier?" And again, I think he was close to being that for a good chunk of the season. But I think a lot of people view you gauge success as to for a guy like Vladdy in particular. You might not do this for, a Nathan Lucas or an Ernie Clement, for example, but I do think you gauge success with Vladdy based on the gaudy statistics like home runs and RBI and so on. And I do think he has the ability to be an above average hitter like that, but it does feel like you more so than in years past because it's not the Vladdy and Bo show. It's now the Vladdy show. You kind of need him to at least put up, he doesn't have to replicate what he did in the playoffs over the course of a whole season. Because I mean, God, I would take that. That'd be like a 50 home run pace, if not more.
That would be
Essentially,
Judgian. That would
yeah.
be something
We were
different.
we're talking like AL MVP here, but you could also be in the running for AL MVP without doing that, right? So, if he had like a Jose Ramirez-esque season, no one's going to complain about that. And Jose Ramirez is one of the most underrated, superstars, essentially, I would say, ever. So, yeah, I'm really curious to see what kind of season Vladdy has. It's funny because of all the storylines that have gone on from the end of the World Series to now, and obviously the WBC is about to take over in the immediate future here because a lot of these guys, including Vladdy, are going to go off and play with their national teams. But it is funny because I just feel like we haven't spoken about Vladdy all that much. I mean, when I say we, I don't just mean the three of us. I just mean generally. It feels like storylines have largely ignored him, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's I guess the familiarity aspect of where
Yeah.
he's been in Toronto for so long at this point. The contract is settled. He's gonna be there for the foreseeable future and beyond the foreseeable future. So, I guess just kind of one of those things. But I think you're totally right. Where like I don't think we've spent a lot of time in the past 10 episodes or so talking about Vladdy's 2026. So, will be fun to see. Before we let you run, I did want to get, just kind of some general spring training thoughts, from you as far as, like some of the other storylines that we haven't talked about that maybe you're interested in or, an under the radar name that's piqued your interest so far.
Sure. I mean, you guys already brought up the Okamotos and the Eloy Jimenezes, which certainly have been really interesting to watch. I'm curious to see more from Sanchez, just
Yeah.
generally speaking. And I mean, he's going to get his chance, right? When all these guys go off to the WBC, he'll play a lot. So I'm sure we'll have more of our questions answered with observations in the next, month or so. But apart from that, I'm trying to think. I guess, I was really intrigued by Chad Dallas. I
Yeah.
thought that was an interesting name, and he's looked good. I've heard a lot of people say that there are a lot of people in the organization that are excited about what he has potential wise. I've always been really intrigued by Gage Stanifer. And, today I thought he was a little scattered. It looked like he was just, I don't know if nerves played a part there, just was struggling to locate the zone at different points. And again, I mean, was that today? Yeah. Time all
Yeah.
blends together for me. But still, I'm really intrigued by him. On a less positive note, they had to back off Ricky Tiedemann. And, Ricky Tiedemann is a guy who obviously went through the injury. I guess it was last year. So there was a bit of a lost year for him. So I was looking forward to seeing him get ramped back up. So I guess that's more of a wait and see. And I guess the other guy I mentioned was, Adam Macko. Adam
Yeah.
Macko was the other guy because I've heard his name bandied about quite a lot in the last year ish, and he looks like he is on his way to getting back to where he was prior to the injuries. So it'll be interesting to see what a lot of these guys look like going forward. And we can talk about the Leo Jimenezes of the world, the Josh Kasoviches of the world, for example, Riley Terada, for example. Those guys are all, I think, in the next tier of interesting names. But yeah, it'll be fascinating to see. I also just wonder generally what development looks like for another year at age 20 for Arjun Nimala,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he is, I still think now the highest ranked position player prospect, I think, in this system. So, just by default, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in him because of that. But yeah, I think he's looked good in small sample sizes. So I want him to continue developing because you got to think if he gets to be age, 22 maybe in the next couple of years, there's a real chance if he is continuing developing at the rate you want, he could very well be the starting shortstop for the Blue Jays if they don't think Andres Jimenez is the future, especially now that Bo Bichette is not in the organization.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of kind of guys bumping up against the ceiling, which we've talked about. There was a lot in the outfield, and they kind of cleared that a little bit with the little Perfido deal. But even kind of broadly, there's a lot of guys in the kind of upper minors that are really knocking on the door in
Yeah.
ways that it doesn't feel like we've had in years past.
No, it's true. I mean, will Josh Kasevich get called up if there's an injury? It probably not, unless there's a lot of injuries. But you're right. It does feel like, in a way, it was not present in 2022-23. It does feel like, when if you guys go down to Buffalo and watch the Bisons play at some point, it does feel like, maybe they're more major league ready talents closer than, single double A, for example.
Yeah, it's been good. Obviously, we love, locking in on the prospects. I think we could
Yeah.
probably sit here for like 2 hours and talk about, how Charles McAdoo has looked at third base in spring training. But it'll be fun to see. I think, Kasevich he's been good in spring training, and obviously Leo's out of options and headed to the World Baseball Classic. So will kind of be interesting what that out or infield group looks like. They claimed Ben Cowles, like
Sure.
just so many
RJ
different guys.
Schreck is a part of
Yeah.
this too, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
didn't talk about him, so I think there's a lot of interesting names, no question.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see. Before we let you run, because we held you for a little bit longer than I said we would. With the World Baseball Classic coming up, gets underway in a week. I think we'll be yeah, the games will be on the TV. What are you most excited for to see from that? And which Blue Jay do you think has the most
Ooh.
to gain or to lose from the tournament?
That's a great question because I feel like there's so many Blue Jays going. I feel like it's tough to
Yeah.
pick one. I'm not going to pick Vladdy just because the Dominican team is stacked essentially, right? But I am actually really interested to see, and it's not because I think he's the odd man out, but just it's a pretty stacked American team, no question. And Ernie is going to play for Team USA. I mean, he's going to be playing infield defense for Team USA, a team that has all stars all up and down the lineup. So I think of all the guys, I think Ernie Clement might be the guy I'm the most interested in seeing just because he's going to be playing on rosters with, like, I don't know, Aaron Judge, for example, right? So it'll be really interesting to see. I think from a Team Canada perspective, I am really fascinated to watch, not a Blue Jay necessarily, but watch, the pitching staff. I mean, the Sorokas and the Tyones of the world. The Nailers are obviously on this team. I mean, Owen Casey, Liam Hicks, Otto Lopez all played for the Marlins today, and they're all going to be on the team. We saw Casey make his debut with the Cubs in Toronto last year, which was really interesting. So yeah, I think it'll be really fun to watch. I also think so. Canada, I want to say for the first time ever, is not in a group with the USA. And now
Yeah.
it's not, I'm not saying it's an easy group to get out of, but at the very least, maybe for the first time ever, their path out of their group to the quarterfinals is possible, right? Whereas, like, I think before you'd be like, it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
No matter how well they play, they're not beating team X, Y, and Z. And still, I mean, they're going to be heavy underdogs to play to teams like obviously the USA, Venezuela, the Dominican, Japan, Korea, like all the usual suspects. But I think there's a good shot they get out of their group, which is kind of fun to think about.
So what's your pick? Do you think they can do it?
Do I think they'll get out of the group? Yeah, I think they do it. Do I think they get out of the group and play in a quarterfinals game? Yes. Do they win a quarterfinals game? Probably not. But I mean, that's wouldn't be a shock, right? It would be a shock if they did win, I think.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, obviously, we're hoping to see them
Sure,
play there.
yeah.
It's funny because I've been like, pretty dialed in on like trying to figure out who's going to be starting against Canada and everything like that. And when the rosters were revealed a few weeks ago, we recorded and we were talking about how, it seemed like they were lining up to face Jose Quintana from Colombia, who is like the best left-hander in their pool. And of course, they have all the Nailers, Casey, Edouard Julien. So it seemed like they were going to get all these lefties. But now Colombia has said they're starting Quintana against Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico
Okay.
starting Seth Lugo in that game. I just think like everything's kind of spinning in Canada's
So
favor.
do we
where-
know? Do we
So-
know who's starting?
So Puerto Rico is the only one that's revealed like their entire
Oh,
rotation
okay.
for the tournament,
I
and then
gotcha.
Colombia has said that Quintana is going to start game one, which is
Right.
against Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico is going to start Eduardo Rivera, who is a double-A lefty in the Red Sox system, but he's like 6'7" and throws 98, 99, whatever. So
Right.
so we'll kind of see, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think that they have a really good chance. They just kind of need to get the Tyones, the Sorokas, like you said, some of these starters, the Paxtons, Mako. I figure will play a really big part in that. Just
Sure.
like there's going to be a really important pitching aspect for Canada in the tournament for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually not as worried about the offense, funnily enough, because for the most part, they are major leaguers, right? I think Denzel Clark is on that team. So, like, I mean, and again, some of these guys are defensive players or are known more for the defensive play. But, I mean, I don't know. I'm not that worried about it. It's funny. I remember when he was with the Guardians still, I got a chance to interview Josh Naylor when he had won the Tip O'Neill Award. And that was pretty cool. And, I mean, he spoke kind of, in a way that I guess we're not used to hearing from baseball players specifically. I mean, I think we're very used. I know the Olympics just finished, but we're very used to hearing this kind of rhetoric from hockey players. Certainly, I think we're becoming more used to hearing it from basketball players, right? I mean, you're hearing the SGAs of the world and the Jamal Murrays of the world and so on talk about how excited they are to play at the FIBA World Cup and at the Olympics and so on. So it's funny how things are changing because I heard it for the first time, really, like with my own 2 ears, at the very least, out of Josh Naylor and how he's so excited. So yeah, it'll be fun. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch. And I mean, look, it'll be hard to top the way the last WBC ended. I mean, teammate on teammate at the time, Otani Trout strikeout. I mean, that's probably the height of the WBC ever as an event. But I think it'll be a fun tune-up. I wonder if maybe the next, CBA negotiations are coming up in the same way they were present in the hockey CBA when, players insisted they want to go back to the Olympics, which we just got. I wonder if that'll be a part of, post-WBC negotiations for baseball players at the Summer Olympics in 2028.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I know obviously we've seen, like Mookie Betts and a bunch of Americans have come out
Bryce
saying
Harper.
that they would
Yeah.
Bryce Harper that they would love to play in the Olympics. So would be really cool. I know, I mean, World Baseball Classic also has been added as like a qualifying tournament for the Olympics.
Right.
So Canada's like almost only shot of playing in the Olympics is finishing as one of the top two America's teams in the WBC.
Oh, that's tough.
So
That's a tough one.
it's tough. Like so,
Yeah.
they would have to make a semi basically, but the U.S. is already in, so they don't count. So they have to finish top three basically, not including.
Oh, I
US,
see. So not counting the, but I mean that still counts teams like I don't
You're
know,
still trying
like
to beat up
the
Venezuela.
Dominican,
Yeah,
Venezuela,
yeah.
Mexico. But
Those
I
are tough
mean,
teams.
if you're putting it together, Canada finishes first in their pool, Mexico finishes second in their pool. Canada beats Mexico, advances to the semis. Japan beats Venezuela. U.S. beats the DR. Canada's
So
in the Olympics.
You've got it all planned out.
Yeah,
He
a lot
knows
has to go
exactly.
right.
He's got the script.
I've been
He's got the
thinking about
script.
it. I've been thinking about it so much. But
I like it.
but Sho, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is great. Always love having you on, and always love listening to you on the radio and joining you from time to time.
Yeah, anytime. Looking forward to having these chats, the three of us, throughout the whole season. We have a long season ahead of us, so I'm sure we'll be doing this more than a couple times.
Absolutely. That is Sho Alli, host and producer on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. You can find him on Twitter at SNS Ali. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening.